Wealthy socialite ridicules travel-worn woman in upscale restaurant. Seconds later, his world crumbles. The Emerald Lounge wasn't just a restaurant. It was New York's sanctum of power and prestige. Crystal chandeliers cast their glow across marble floors where fortunes were made and legacies cemented. White lilies adorned each table, their pristine petals mirroring the fragile egos dining beneath them. To cross this threshold was to announce your arrival in Manhattan's elite inner circle. Sophia Chen pushed through the heavy brass doors, drawing curious stares from every direction. Her simple navy dress, chosen for comfort during her punishing 22-hour flight from Tokyo, hung loosely on her slender frame. The wrinkles told stories of airport terminals and cramped economy seats. Her jet-black hair, typically styled with meticulous precision, had rebelled during the flight, escaping its hasty bun in wisps that framed her exhausted face. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, testament to back-to-back conferences followed by the international dateline's disorienting leap. She hadn't even checked into her hotel, coming straight from JFK with only her small carry-on, which she now discreetly tucked beside the host stand. "I believe Marco is expecting me," she said quietly to the host, who studied her with barely concealed skepticism. At the center table sat Alexander Wright, a venture capitalist whose reputation for ruthlessness preceded him in Manhattan's upper echelons. His tailored Italian suit fit like armor, his Swiss timepiece catching the light with each calculated gesture. His companions, similarly outfitted in designer wear, hung on his every word. Alexander was one of those men who measured worth by how effectively they could diminish others. His specialty was casual cruelty, delivered with just enough wit that observers felt permitted, even obligated, to laugh along. He collected these moments like trophies: the stammering intern, the flustered receptionist, the tourists who dared ask him for directions. It wasn't about followers or fame. It was simpler and more primitive: the intoxicating rush of power that came from public dominance. Alexander's attention shifted as Sophia was led to a table. His predatory gaze registered her rumpled appearance, her obvious fatigue, her simple attire. A slow smile spread across his face, the same smile that had preceded countless humiliations. "Well, well," he murmured to his companions, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Looks like someone confused the Emerald Lounge with the bus terminal cafeteria." His companions snickered on cue, their laughter drawing more attention to Sophia. She noticed, of course, but unlike Alexander's usual targets, Sophia didn't shrink. Instead, she met his gaze directly, her exhausted eyes suddenly sharp and assessing. The hunt had begun, but this time, the prey was watching the hunter. Sophia opened her menu, her fingers still stiff from the airplane's recycled air. The Emerald Lounge's signature lighting, designed to flatter the complexions of its wealthy patrons, cast a soft glow across the pristine tablecloth. She could feel Alexander's gaze boring into her, cataloging each perceived flaw: the faint coffee stain on her sleeve, her travel-worn shoes, the absence of designer accessories that served as the Emerald Lounge's unofficial entry fee. A waiter approached, his practiced smile wavering slightly when he saw her. He was young, perhaps mid-20s, with the careful posture of someone who had learned that perfect service was his only armor in rooms filled with power. "Perhaps Madam would prefer our Prix Fixe option," he suggested, pointedly avoiding mention of the chef's tasting menu, the most expensive offering. His eyes darted briefly toward Alexander's table, as if seeking approval for handling this unexpected situation. "The full tasting menu, please," Sophia replied, her voice carrying a quiet confidence that momentarily confused the waiter. "And sparkling water for now. I'll decide on wine after speaking with Marco." The mention of the owner's name caused the slightest flicker of uncertainty in the waiter's eyes, but he nodded professionally and with "Better check your credit limit first, honey. That menu costs more than your entire outfit." Several diners turned to watch the unfolding spectacle. This was the Emerald Lounge's unspoken entertainment. the occasional public takedown that reminded everyone of the social hierarchy's rigid boundaries, a ritual of reinforcement where those inside the circle demonstrated why others should remain outside. Sophia took a slow sip of water, her eyes never leaving Alexander's. "I'm sure I'll manage." A calm response only fueled Alexander's determination. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with theatrical disdain, a performer who knew his audience well. The slight tilt of his head invited others to join his assessment. "Let me guess, big night out? Once-in-a-lifetime splurge, or just lost?" Each question was a dart designed to pierce dignity. "Tourist bucket list, perhaps. Eat where the real New Yorkers eat." Sophia placed her napkin in her lap with deliberate care. "Just hungry." The brevity of her response seemed to irritate Alexander more than any defense might have. Around them, conversations had quieted, the surrounding tables now passive participants in the unfolding drama. "You know," Alexander continued, his voice rising to ensure the surrounding tables could hear, "there's a perfectly decent diner 10 blocks south. Plastic menus, free refills, much more your ambience." He pronounced the last word with exaggerated precision, as if teaching vocabulary to a child. His companions snickered, emboldened by his cruelty. A woman in diamonds at the next table poorly concealed her smirk behind a manicured hand. An older gentleman frowned slightly, but said nothing, his silence a form of complicity that hung in the air. "Thank you for the recommendation," Sophia replied evenly. "Perhaps another time." The waiter returned with sparkling water, pouring it with a hand that trembled slightly. Alexander caught the waiter's eye and winked conspiratorially, a gesture that seemed to say, "We both know she doesn't belong." The young man's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly as he completed his task and withdrew, avoiding Sophia's eyes. His retreat was the withdrawal of a potential ally, another small victory for Alexander. Alexander stood, sensing an opportunity. He casually strolled towards Sophia's table, wineglass in hand, a predator moving in for the kill. The restaurant seemed to hold its collective breath. Even the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers seemed to dim. "I'm just trying to save you from embarrassment," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "This place has standards. Doesn't it feel a bit aspirational for someone like you?" The Emerald Lounge had become a theater, with Alexander center stage and Sophia unwillingly cast as his foil. A woman at a nearby table discreetly raised her phone, anticipating a moment worth capturing. "Someone like me?" Sophia echoed, looking directly into his eyes for the first time. Something flickered behind her exhausted gaze, a depth that momentarily gave Alexander pause. Not fear, not anger, but something he couldn't quite place. It was gone before he could identify it. Alexander faltered momentarily at the unexpected intensity of her gaze, but quickly recovered, glancing around to ensure his audience remained engaged. "Well, let's be honest. You're clearly not from around here." He gestured vaguely at her appearance with his free hand, the diamond cufflink catching the light. "The Emerald Lounge has a certain clientele, a certain quality we've come to expect." The dining room had grown quieter. Even the waitstaff paused, watching the scene unfold with practiced neutrality that barely masked their discomfort. A sommelier froze mid-pour, wine hovering above crystal. "And you're the arbiter of quality?" Sophia asked, her voice still composed, but with a new edge that made several observers shift uneasily in their seats. The question wasn't defensive. It was almost curious, as if she was studying a specimen. Alexander laughed, playing to his audience. "I don't need to be. Quality announces itself. Just like." He gestured at her again, its opposite. A few nervous titters scattered through the restaurant, but others were beginning to look uncomfortable, the entertainment value of his cruelty wearing thin. An older couple exchanged glances and subtle headshakes. A young "Interesting perspective," Sophia said, folding her hands on the table. Something in her posture had changed, a subtle shift from exhaustion to alertness. The weariness in her eyes was replaced by something cooler, more calculating. Years seemed to fall away from her face, revealing a composed clarity that hadn't been there moments before. Alexander, mistaking her composure for weakness, moved closer, the predator closing in. Certain of his dominance in this territory, he considered his own. "Look, I'm doing you a favor. Places like this eat little strays like you alive. Why don't you, Mr. Right?" Sophia interrupted, her voice now carrying a quiet authority that stopped him mid-sentence. She didn't raise her volume, but somehow her words carried through the restaurant with perfect clarity. "Is public humiliation always your opening move, or am I receiving special treatment tonight?" The restaurant grew silent, every eye fixed on this unexpected confrontation. The power dynamic, so clear moments ago, suddenly seemed less certain. Alexander's smile froze, then faltered. For the first time that evening, doubt crept into his expression. She knew his name. She hadn't been guessing. The Emerald Lounge fell silent, conversations evaporating into the rarefied air. Alexander's confident smile hung awkwardly on his face as Sophia's gaze steadied on him. "I make it my business to know the regulars," she said simply, her travel-worn appearance belying the steel in her voice. Alexander faltered, just a heartbeat, before recovering. "Homework or not, you still look like you wandered in from the bus station," his voice carried, designed for his audience. "Standards matter here." Sophia set down her water glass with deliberate precision. The exhaustion in her eyes cleared, revealing something that made several observers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Recognition of a predator who had chosen the wrong prey. "Mock me again," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Those 3 words hung in the air. Not a question, not quite a threat, but a final warning before consequences. Alexander laughed, sharp and hollow against the silence. "Or what, exactly?" Sophia's eyes never left his. "Marco," she called, her voice suddenly commanding the entire room. Across the restaurant, a distinguished man looked up sharply, recognition and concern flashing across his face as he registered the scene unfolding at her table. Every diner held their breath for what would come next. Marco's head snapped up at Sophia's voice, recognition instantly flooding his face. "Sophia," he called out, abandoning his conversation mid-word. The distinguished owner moved through his restaurant with purpose, his normally composed demeanor replaced by genuine concern. "Marco." Sophia's face softened with warmth as her old friend approached, the exhaustion in her eyes momentarily vanished, replaced by genuine affection. "What is happening here?" Marco asked, looking between Sophia and Alexander with growing understanding. His hand rested protectively on Sophia's shoulder, a gesture that spoke volumes to the observing diners. "This gentleman was explaining your restaurant standards," Sophia said quietly. "Apparently, I don't meet them." Marco's expression transformed from concern to controlled fury. He turned to Alexander, drawing himself up to his full height. "You were speaking of standards to Sophia Chen." Alexander shifted uncomfortably, sensing he'd stumbled into something he didn't understand. "Just a bit of harmless." "There is nothing harmless about disrespect in my establishment." Marco cut him off, his accent thickening with emotion. "Especially not to the woman who saved my daughter's life. Who stood by my wife through cancer treatment. Who has been my family's guardian angel for 2 decades. The restaurant had gone completely silent, every eye fixed on the unfolding scene. "Do you have any idea who Sophia Chen is?" Marco continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. Alexander swallowed hard. When my restaurant was failing and every bank had turned me away, Marco's voice swelled with emotion. It was Sophia who believed in me. Sophia who invested her life savings without asking for any ownership stake. Sophia who worked alongside me in the kitchen for months until we found our footing. Diners exchanged glances, many leaning forward to catch every word. A woman at a nearby table nodded in quiet understanding. The woman you mock for the simple dress, Marco continued, gesturing to Sofia, has built schools across 3 continents. The woman whose appearance you ridicule sits on the boards of charities that have saved thousands of lives. She has done more good in this world than you will accomplish in 10 lifetimes. Marco's hand moved to a hidden earpiece. Security, he said simply. 2 impeccably dressed. Mr. Wright is no longer welcome at the Emerald Lounge, Marco announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. Nor at any establishment in my hospitality group. Alexander's face flushed deep red. You can't. I can and I am, Marco interrupted. The Emerald Lounge isn't just a restaurant, Mr. Wright. It's my life's work. And in my restaurant, we know the difference between wealth and worth. He turned to the security team. Through the service entrance, please. He doesn't deserve to use our front door. As Alexander was escorted away, stunned diners watched his humiliating procession through the restaurant. Those who had snickered at his cruelty minutes earlier now avoided eye contact, embarrassed by their complicity. Marco turned to Sofia, taking her hands in his. Forgive me, he said softly. Had I known you were arriving tonight, I would have greeted you properly. Elena will be furious that she missed you. Sofia smiled. I came straight from the airport. Didn't want to miss Isabella's graduation tomorrow. Around them, the restaurant burst into spontaneous applause, not for wealth or status, but for the authentic connection they witnessed. A reminder that true standards had nothing to do with appearances and everything to do with character. Marco stood, addressing his patrons with renewed dignity. Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy your evening. And remember, in this establishment, we measure people by the kindness in their hearts, not the labels on their clothes. He turned back to Sofia, his stern expression melting into a warm smile. Now, shall we call Elena and the children? They'll want to know you've arrived home safely. 3 days later, Alexander Wright stood in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, staring at his phone in disbelief. The post had gone viral overnight, shaky footage of his humiliation at the Emerald Lounge, captured by at least a dozen diners. Their phones had caught everything. His mockery, Sofia's calm dignity, Marco's thunderous intervention, and Alexander's walk of shame through the kitchen. #ToxicTycoon was trending nationwide. His social media accounts hemorrhaged followers by the thousands. Calls from business associates went unanswered. Dinner invitations mysteriously disappeared. The empire of influence he'd built, constructed on the foundation of others' fear, was collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. The comments were relentless. Finally, someone stood up to him. Been waiting years to see him get what he deserves. This is the same guy who made my sister cry when she was his waitress. Alexander's phone buzzed with a message from his publicist. Cannot repair this. Strongly advise social media blackout. We'll call tomorrow to discuss exit strategy. Exit strategy. As if he were a failed business venture rather than a human being. Meanwhile, across town in a brownstone in Brooklyn, laughter filled a sunlit garden. Children chased each other across lush green grass, while adults gathered around tables laden with homemade dishes. The smell of fresh bread and spices filled the warm evening air. Sofia, now rested and relaxed in jeans and a simple blouse, stood beside Marco at the grill, both holding glasses of wine and sharing stories like the old friends they were. You should have seen his face, Marco chuckled, turning skewers with expert precision. 15 years owning the Emerald Lounge, and I've never enjoyed throwing someone out more. Sofia smiled, watching Marco's youngest daughter teaching her own children how to play chess. Some lessons need to be learned publicly, she said quietly. The powerful rarely listen otherwise. Speaking of power, Marco said, lowering his voice, Tokyo went well. Sofia nodded, taking a sip of her wine. 5 million children will have access to clean water and education by next year. Worth every minute of that flight. As twilight settled over the backyard gathering, no one mentioned Alexander Wright or the Emerald Lounge incident. Here, among family and true friends, titles and wealth meant nothing. What mattered was the genuine connection shared over simple food and honest conversation. A richness that Alexander, for all his wealth, would never understand. As our story of unexpected triumph concludes, we're reminded that true power isn't found in designer suits or exclusive tables. It's discovered in the quiet dignity of those who know their worth, regardless of how others perceive them. Sophia's journey from being mocked to commanding respect unfolded in just moments, but its impact will last in the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. How many times have we judged someone by their appearance, only to discover later the depth of character hidden beneath? Have you ever been underestimated or witnessed someone being dismissed because they didn't fit the expected image? Remember, in a world quick to judge, sometimes the